I awoke, disoriented and in pain. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead cast a sickly yellow glow that only added to the pounding ache in my head. The walls were made of cold, grey concrete, and the air smelt stale and musty. I sat up, slowly, aware that I had no recollection of how I got here. I tried to recall the events leading up to now, but nothing but a messy fog came through. Panic started to set in as I tried to piece together the events leading up to this moment. "Hello, sunshine," a voice boomed. I looked up and my eyes slowly focused. Dressed in his blue uniform, donut in one hand and a cup of coffee or tea in the other, like a walking stereotype, he smirked at me from the other side of the cell bars. Feigning a smile, I grumbled, "Hey Chief, you're looking good," while rubbing my temples. "Coffee?" he asked, lifting the cup in his hand slightly. "Got anything stronger?" I mumbled back, the hangover hitting me in waves. "Ha, that's what got you in here, John," he snorted, walking up to my cell and placing the paper cup on the bar. Small towns, you gotta love them. I knew all the local police on a first-name basis, and they all knew mine. I felt like I spent more time in here than at my own place. I probably did. But I wasn't always the town drunk. In fact, I'd only recently come to accept that I was. Once upon a time, though, I was a small store manager, running a team of 5 sales and a couple admin staff in an electronics store. I was happy. We were happy. My partner and I had just bought our first place together, a small 3-bedroom 1970s property on an acre of land. It was close enough to town that shopping and travelling to work wasn't an issue, but far enough out that it felt private and quiet, just what we had dreamed of. "Just one more photo," Lucy said, grinning, "before they take the sold sign down." "All right, one more," I replied, feigning annoyance. I really didn't mind, but I couldn't let her know. "All right, smile you two," Mindy, Lucy's sister, said. She aimed the camera at us as we stood in front of the large real estate sign that had the big sold sticker plastered across it. "John, put your hand on her belly," she said, indicating to Lucy's pregnant stomach. I smiled, placing one hand around her and the other resting on the lump of her belly. "Cheese." Lightning cracked outside the cell's only window, and only now I noticed how dark and stormy it was outside. "What time is it?" I asked, rubbing the back of my neck as I stood to go retrieve the coffee. "A little past 5 in the morning," Chief Beveridge replied. Grabbing the cup of coffee off the bar, I raised it in thanks to the chief and took a sip. Instantly, the warm coffee had an effect on my headache, making me feel more awake and alert. I took another sip and let the caffeine work its magic as another crash of lightning lit up the skies, shortly followed by a guttural rolling thunder that shook the prison. Just like the night that changed my life. We had been out celebrating our baby shower with friends and family. The forecast had mentioned a little rain, but nothing like the storm we found ourselves in as we drove home that night. "Maybe slow down a little," Lucy said, one hand on her belly and the other on the dash in front of her as she peered through the windshield at the storm outside. The window wipers were on high, but they were fighting a losing battle against the downpour. Lightning lit up the sky and thunder rattled the car's doors. "I'm already doing half the speed limit. Any slower, we'll just be sitting here," I replied, trying to keep an eye on the cat's eyes reflected in my high beams. The roads were so slick with running water and puddles that the paint lines were impossible to see in the dark. Besides, there's a hot bath and a cold, alcohol-free red wine waiting for you when we get home, I smirked, quickly glancing at her. She looked back at me and returned the smile before looking back at the road. "John!" Lucy screamed. I looked back at the road and my heart jumped in my throat. A fork of lightning illuminated the sky, and in the middle of the road was a figure just standing there. I hit the brakes and swerved. Although I was going well below the speed limit, the wheels locked up and the car skidded uncontrollably across the wet surface. The impact wasn't massive. It didn't need to be. We had slid sideways into a power pole, hitting it with the front passenger door. It wasn't hard, but it was hard enough. They tried to resuscitate her. They tried to save our unborn baby. When I spoke to the police later that night, it had been Chief Beveridge who had been the shoulder I needed to cry on. I told him almost everything that had happened, including that there had been a person standing in the middle of the road. I didn't tell him that the person in the middle of the road was me. A rattling of keys snapped my attention back to my current predicament. "Come on, let's get you home," the chief said as he tried different keys to unlock my cell. "Having a bit of trouble there?" I mumbled. He chose to ignore me. After 4 or 5 attempts, he finally found a key that fit. He swung open the large cell cage door and took a step to the side, motioning with his head for me to leave. As I exited the cell, he held out the donut to me. "Get some sugar into you," he said as I took it from his hand. "Cheers," I replied, raising the donut to take a bite. We walked down the short corridor past the other cells. All were empty, except one which held a large man who looked like a truck driver. He was snoring on his side, though I hadn't heard him earlier due to the thunder and heavy rain outside. The lighting in the station was ancient, as if it had never been upgraded in the 19th century building. The lights flickered as another crash of thunder rattled the walls. "Quite the storm out there. You're lucky the patrol picked you up before you got caught in it," the chief said as he swiped his card to unlock the door. A little red light flashed up as it emitted a sharp double buzz noise. "Sorry, it does this," he said, wiping the card against his shirt before trying again. This time, a little green light lit up and a long, single buzz sounded out. He leaned on the door handle and pushed it open, leading me through to the main office and reception area of the station. There wasn't much activity in the station, as expected at 5 a.m. A few uniformed officers sitting at desks, some administrators working away on their computers, and 2 team members managing the reception near the entry doors. There was a light buzz of conversation over the clicking of keyboards, and a mounted TV in the corner played some local news channel. It was a large, open space, with computers sitting on a couple of dozen desks that were separated by freestanding cubicle dividers, while 4 glass-walled offices lined the side wall. The offices had their lights off, so it was just the 7 or 8 staff plus the chief and I in the station. We started walking through the maze of desks and chairs. "Let me just grab your things, John," the chief said, indicating for me to take a seat at an empty desk and wait while he headed over to one of the admin members. I looked around the room to see if I recognised any of the staff today, but my sight was still hazy and my eyes didn't like focusing, so I gave up pretty quick. A burst of cold air rushed in, and the sound of rain intensified for a moment as the front door was pushed open. I shivered and rubbed my eyes, trying unsuccessfully to replay the events from the previous evening in my head. Try as I might, I could not remember a thing. All I could think about was that night. After the car had crashed, a couple of windows shattered, letting cold air rush through, the sound of rain hammering down. The figure in the street that I had swerved to avoid had started walking towards the car in the rain. Lit up in the car's headlights, I could see my face, dripping with water, on the body of the stranger walking towards me. A creepy smile spread across my face, as he got closer and closer. He blinked, not a normal up and down blink with the eyelids, but a side to side blink with a black set of hidden eyelids. He kept walking, closer and closer, his smile growing bigger and bigger. Then, red and blue lights lit up his face and his smile vanished. He took off, running into the bush on the other side of the road as 2 police cars came around the corner. The front door closed again, and the chilly air and rain had died down when I noticed the room had gone quiet. I took my hand down from my face, opened my eyes, and glanced around the room. The staff had all stopped what they were doing and were looking towards the front of the station. Even the chief was standing still, staring at something. I placed my hands on the desk and stood up slowly, leaning forward slightly to get a better view of the front door. A wave of confusion hit me, as the reason everyone had stopped talking became evident. Standing in the doorway, water dripping on the floor from his blue uniform, was Chief Beveridge. He was breathing deep, laboured breaths and appeared to be covered not only in water but also mud and some blood. He had his gun in his hand by his side and was staring intently across the station at the other chief, the one I had just been speaking with. The other officers and staff were looking back and forth between the 2 chiefs, the dry chief and the wet chief, looking just as confused as I was feeling. One of the uniformed officers broke the silence. Chief, what's going on?" he said, but to which chief I wasn't sure. I noticed the officers slowly reaching for their holsters, and I took a step back. What the hell was going on? The wet chief didn't say anything, but slowly raised his gun towards the dry chief. The officers' training kicked in as they unholstered their weapons and drew them in a flash. "Lower your gun," one of them yelled uncertainly. Finally speaking, Wet Chief yelled, "That is not me," his gun now pointing directly at the dry chief. "Lower your gun, Chief," the officer repeated. I looked back at Dry Chief, who was standing with his hand on the shoulder of the admin lady. Susan, I think her name was. The poor woman was visibly shaking in fear, a gun pointed in her direction. She appeared to have wet herself, as I could see liquid dripping to the floor from her seat. "Chief, I don't know what's going on here, but I need you to lower your gun and we can work this out," one of the other officers yelled. Susan was shaking even harder now, convulsing almost. Something wasn't right. The officers started to notice as well. I looked down at Chief Beveridge's hand that was on her shoulder, and my heart stopped. They were across the room from me, and the lighting wasn't the best, but still, I could see in perfect clarity now. His fingers, the parts that I could still see, were black and pulsating. They had penetrated her shoulder, ripping through her top and digging into her skin. I looked down at the liquid that I had first thought was urine dripping from his seat. It was now gushing down, and it was red. I looked back at Dry Chief, my eyes wide and full of clarity now. Dry Chief turned his head slowly towards me, a smile spreading on his face. Then he blinked, a sideways blink, with black, hidden eyelids. When the side-set eyelids slid back, eyes as black as coal had replaced his usually vibrant blue and white pair. I stumbled back, crashing into the desk behind me. Raising my hand to point at Dry Chief, I yelled, "That's not the chief!" A snarl formed on his face, and he whipped his head back towards the officers. Their faces dropped as they saw for the first time his lifeless eyes. They swung their guns around to face Dry Chief, but were too slow. Out of his chest burst multiple black tendrils. In an instant, I watched as the tendrils impaled the other officers and staff. The closest officer was struck directly in his eyeball, dropping his gun immediately as his arms fell to his sides, blood immediately splattering all over his desk. The second officer was struck in the throat, crushing his larynx and snapping his head back. The third officer was struck directly in the chest, with the tendril piercing right through and out of his back. The two receptionists who were facing the wet chief, the real chief, were both hit squarely in the back of their head, slamming their heads forward onto the desks in front of them, splattering blood all over the computers, while their last admin staff had been sitting side on to the dry chief, and the tendril had hit her directly in the ear. Any remnants of my hangover were completely gone now as I surveyed the horror in the room before me in wide-eyed shock. The officers remained standing, arms dropped to their sides, convulsing as the black, vine-like tendrils weaved out across the room. The other staff shook uncontrollably in the place they had been impaled by this creature. All this in a matter of seconds. The creature's eyes were now completely black, glossed over and lifeless, as it tilted its head back and let out an ear-piercing shriek, unlike anything I have ever heard. In horror, I watched as the impaled bodies at the end of the writhing tendrils all tilted their heads back and began screeching in unison. I slammed my hands to my ears with little effect as, simultaneously, Chief Beveridge started unloading his weapon in the creature's direction, and the glass throughout the police station began shattering. The high-pitched shrieking had caused all the glass in the office to smash. Cups, office windows, and the light bulbs. The room was cast into complete darkness. The creature yelped and stopped screeching as Chief Beveridge managed to hit it at least once before the last light bulb shattered. He fired a few more shots, temporarily illuminating the room from the muzzle flash. I heard multiple thuds, and the room fell silent, bar the ringing in my ears. A moment later, a light beam flickered on from Chief Beveridge's torch as I heard him reload his gun. The torch beam cut through the darkness of the room, scanning the area the creature had just been. It was gone, and the bodies that had been attached to the end of its tendrils had collapsed to the floor. Chief Beveridge swung the beam from one side of the room to the other, calling out, "Do you see it?" to me as he did. In shock, I just stood there, mouth open and heart racing. "Do you see it?" he yelled again, snapping me out of my trance. No, I don't see it," I stuttered. "Make your way over to me, John," he called, "and do it quickly." I started moving in his direction, sticking as close to the outer wall as possible, while frantically looking around the room for the creature. Lightning crashed outside, briefly illuminating the room, before plunging us back into darkness, bar the light of the chief's torch as it darted around the large space. The beam was causing shadows to dance around the station, making it even harder to spot the creature. I crept slowly, with very little light to guide my way, trying not to trip over anything and fear the creature would pounce if I did. Crunching glass broke the silence as I walked past the office where the glass windows had shattered. I tried so hard not to look in the rooms. The chief's torch beam didn't reach the insides of the office, and the corners were pitch black. I felt like the creature could be mere feet away from me, standing in one of the rooms, staring right at me, reaching for me, and I would never know. I gulped, keeping my eyes towards the chief, and pushed that thought down out of my mind. A loud crash caused me to jump as something smashed into a desk on the opposite side of the room, knocking a computer monitor to the floor. I jumped again as the chief swung his torch beam and gun in that direction, firing off 2 shots. I caught a glimpse of the creature, albeit brief, but it was enough to cause panic to rise up in my throat into a scream. All likeness of the chief was gone. It moved on 4, maybe 6 limbs, like a giant demonic lizard. Its pure black skin, blacker than the darkness around it, glistened as the torch beam passed over it, as it moved through the walkways between the cubicles. A large, spiny fin ran down the length of its back, like a dinosaur, and black tendrils would shoot out from its sides, attaching to the desks, chairs and dividers in front and beside it, assisting its movement as it appeared to glide through the space. Desks and chairs moved, like a predator would move grass in a field as it chased down its prey, and it was making a beeline straight for me. "Run!" the chief yelled, firing 3 more shots at the creature. Without hesitating, I took off in a full sprint towards the front door. I could hear the creature crashing through the station behind me, its tendrils firing out at every object, pulling it along with tremendous speed, getting closer and closer with every step I took. I pushed harder, only a few meters left. I could feel the beast behind me, almost feel its breath on my neck. I was almost at the reception desk. A black tendril smashed into the desk beside me, and another into the wall on my other side. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned to look. It towered above me, opening its mouth and exposing rows and rows of sharp, dagger-like teeth that seemed to go all the way down its throat as the smell of rotting bodies washed over me. I was so close, but I was done. I flinched as it moved in for the kill. I just hoped it would be quick, painless. 3 gunshots echoed in my ear in quick succession. The creature screeched again and dove back and away between some desks and chairs. I swung around and the chief just looked at me and said, "Go." I took off to the front door and opened it before looking back at the chief. "Get out of here. Go call the National Guard, the feds, everyone. I can't let it get out," he said as he moved to the door. He pushed me outside and locked the door behind me. I thought about trying to convince him to come with me, but I knew it would be a waste of time. I looked at him through the glass doors, nodded and said, "Thank you." Then I took off to find a phone. And this brings me to now, the reason I am sharing the story with you all, in case I don't make it. You see, I found a phone. The local gas station a few blocks away was open, and after the attendant saw the state I was in and the look of terror on my face, he immediately led me to the office and gave me the phone. I called everyone, the National Guard, the feds, the police stations and the next towns over, but I don't think anyone is coming. I did manage to convince the person I was speaking to at the National Guard to at least call the police station. They reluctantly agreed, putting me on mute, but kept me on the line while they dialed. After half a dozen rings, Chief Beveridge finally answered, and I was extremely relieved to hear his voice. After going through the standard identification process, the man from the National Guard said, "We have reports of major injuries, possibly deaths, in your station. Do you require immediate assistance?" My relief washed away into fear at Chief Beveridge's response. No issues here. We just had our local town drunk, John, causing a bit of a scene earlier. We've released him already, but I think I might do a welfare check on him." I started yelling down the phone as they wrapped up their conversation. Tears formed in my eyes, my screams falling on deaf ears as I was still on mute. The man from the National Guard thanked him and apologised for the inconvenience before coming back to me and warning me about the trouble I could get into for filing false reports and wasting their time. He ignored my pleas and hung up on me, leaving me listening to the dial tone in disbelief. After what felt like an hour, I lowered the phone back to the receiver. As I leaned back in the chair, I could feel the blood running from me, leaving my skin feeling cold and clammy. I lowered my head into my hands, accepting that this was maybe it. I heard the door swing open. Heard the attendant clear his throat. "Do you know how to use one of these?" he asked. I lifted my head from my hands. He was holding an M4 shotgun towards me. He had some sort of assault rifle draped over his shoulder and what looked like a modified Magnum handgun in a holster on his hip. "I heard your call," he said as he handed me the shotgun. My mouth was open in shock. "I've been hunting this thing since it took my brother 2 years ago. You want to help me kill this fucker?" he asked, a hint of crazy in his eyes. I slowly stood, still in disbelief, looking at the slightly greying station attendant. For the first time, I started noticing details about him that I missed earlier, such as his muscular build under the loosely fitting polo shirt, the battle scars on his hands and face, and the Special Forces tattoo peeking out from the bottom of his polo. "Well?" he asked, squinting his eyes at me. I looked at the shotgun in my hands and then back at him and felt a surge of anger and confidence wash over me. "Fuck yes. For Chief Beveridge," I said. "For my brother," he said. "And for Lucy." That was an original horror story by One More Nightmare. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for One More Nightmare.